So in this video, I'm going to talk about polyatomic ions, and there are like hundreds of these ions, each with there's not exactly any kind of name scheme for any of these ions. So yeah, right, and there's 100 of these, so your best bet is to kind of try to memorize the names of these ions. But I should probably start with what a polyatomic ion actually is. So polyatomic ions are basically groups of, well, not groups, it's basically a polyatomic ion is like a covalently bonded molecule, right, that has an overall net charge. So things like NO3 minus, right, where the N's and O's are covalently bonded, but they still have a total net charge of -1. So things like this, NO3 minus, PO4 3 minus, SO4 2 minus, and then let's see, let's focus on some of the halogens. ClO3 minus, IO3 minus, BRO3 minus. So things like that. Now, I'm not here right now today to discuss the philosophy of polyatomic ions, but I'm here to discuss kind of like their naming and stuff, because naming is kind of complicated. Well, not complicated, but there are a lot of ions, and there isn't really a naming scheme, so your best bet is really to memorize them. So I'm here to talk about some of the common polyatomic ions. Your teacher might give you a list of the polyatomic ions that you need to remember for your class. I know my teacher did that, I think. So really, I'm making this video just to show the more common polyatomic ions. Now, normally the polyatomic ions are anions, but there's some cations, polyatomic cations, like NH4+. So I'll just go through the names of these, like all of these, right? So this one is called nitrate, and this one's called phosphate. So you can probably already tell a lot of these polyatomic ions end in 8, which is usually the case. But their derivatives, like if I took this one and removed an oxygen or added an oxygen, then the ending would change from like phosphate to phosphite, perphosphate, stuff like that. So these are the base ions, right? So this is, you can probably guess, will be Ln8, and it does. It's called sulfate. This also, you can also probably guess this ends in an 8. This is chlorate. And this is iodate. Right, you can see so far that a lot of the things that end in 8 have 3 oxygens. And for some of the really common ones, some of the really common polyatomic ions, this is kind of true, but this isn't exactly a naming scheme of anything. At least for the halogens, this is true. Anything with 3 oxygens is an 8. So this is chlorate, iodate. This is also a halogen with 3 oxygens. So this is bromate, right? And this is, at least this really depends on like what level of chemistry you're I don't know, studying. But this is really the only, or one of the only polyatomic cations you'll ever see, or yeah, you will see. But this is called ammonium, and you should know this, because the fact that it's one of the few polyatomic cations you're gonna learn about, at least in the lower kind of levels of chemistry, makes it a good target for it to be asked on exams and stuff. So yeah, really your best bet is to memorize the names of some of the common polyatomic ions. Ideally your teacher gives you a sheet of the polyatomic ions that'll be used in the class. But these are some of the more common ones. There's also another common one, CO3 2 minus. You can probably guess it also ends in an 8, and it does. It's carbonate, right? And there's some, now we tend to think of metals as generally being cations, which is for the most part true, but there's some weird transition metals that tend to bond covalently with other elements to form anions. So you end up with things like manganese, right? MnO4 minus. So I end up with things like these. This Mn ideally would be a cation, but it covalently bonds with an oxygen to form an overall anion. So you end up with things like this. And this is kind of common, so I'll just give you the name for it. This is manganate. Can I fit it in here? Let's see. Yo, that's clutch, right? And there are also other ones, other transition metals that do this weird thing, like CrO4 2-. That's called chromate. And there's some even crazier one with the chromium, Cr2O7 2-, and that's dichromate. Right, so these are crazy, some of the more crazier polyatomic ions, but this is a list of some of the more common ones. So ideally, you search this up on Google and memorize a bunch of them. But hopefully I helped with this video at least to try to introduce you to some of the polyatomic ions, and stay tuned for more cool stuff.